So I'm Bruce Hayse. I've known Bert going on 40 years. I first met Bert when he came to my office with some medical complaints. Now, Peter said, well, don't get to talk about the medical parts here, but I'm actually going to do that anyway. Bert came to the office. He said, I had some problems with his vision and sitting on the exam table, and he wanted to know what these could possibly represent. So I sort of run through the list of possibilities that these symptoms could represent, and I finished up by saying, and of course, it could also be a brain tumor. And he looked at me and he said, "What'd you say?" I said, "Well, of course, it could be a brain tumor as well." And at that, his eyes rolled back in his head, and he fairly rapidly fell off the table onto the floor. And Bert was a pretty big guy back in those days. So this was a pretty massive event that I don't think anybody in the clinic could miss. So anyway, that was how I got to meet Bert. That was the first time I met Bert, and that was an impressive way to start. And anyway, Bert was a very special friend of mine. Bert was like a father to me, and I think I was kind of like a son to him. And I used to, whenever they ask you for emergency contact, and who I'd put down Bert Raynes, and who's that as your father, and of course that always surprised people. And go to the senior center, oh, I didn't know Bert was your father. And we had a lot of fun with that, and we had a lot of fun. We'd go to a lot of meetings, events, and where they had name tags, and he and I would always switch name tags. So I'd be Bert Raynes and he'd be Bruce Hayse, and of course people would look at me and say, oh, I kind of thought, I thought you were a little older and maybe more dignified. We wouldn't even necessarily let on. So we had a lot of fun through the years doing that. We had a lot of fun doing a lot of adventures. He was always one to be up for any adventure. And some of you that may not have known Bert till he was older and didn't realize that, but he was a pretty vigorous guy and pretty much up for anything. We did a lot of great trips. Probably the most memorable one was the trip down Black Rock Creek, where we ran Black Rock Creek at high water in my little raft, and we had no idea. I'd never been down it before. I didn't know anybody had been down it before, but I heard somebody had been down it before. I didn't realize till later that they had to be rescued and spent the rest of the night screaming. But anyway, after the first waterfall, and we broke the oar, and at that point, then we ended up pinned against an island in the middle of Black Rock Creek, which was raging, and I managed to swim to shore and then pulled the raft to shore. But by that time it was getting dark, and we were a long ways from the vehicle because we were on the wrong side of the creek. So we ended up walking, I think, about 10 miles that night to get back to where we'd put the vehicle at the takeout. And of course, Bert never complained about anything. He was never a complainer. The only thing he was worried about was Meg. Oh, Meg's going to be up. She's going to be tearing her hair out. She's going to be frantic. Of course, the first thing we did was got back to the ranger station there, went to the phone booth. They had phone booths in those days. And Bert, of course, first thing he did, I got to call Meg right away. She's going to be having a fit. And of course, he called her up and she said, I'm sleeping. Don't bother me. I'll see you when you get back to town. We had a lot of adventures like that, and Bert was always happy to be outside. He was always happy to be in nature. As you well know, Bert had this immense love of nature, immense love of this world. He was very much totally in this world and had no agendas and no conflict. When Bert was dying, we were at Bert's that night, and he thought maybe this is the end, and he was perfectly happy with that. He woke up the next morning and he said, am I still alive? He wasn't sure, because he was perfectly comfortable. And we were sitting on his bed and talking about baby whales. Breathing was getting more shallow, and he was obviously leaving the world. And Brenda, his good nurse, who took wonderful care of him, Brenda was phenomenal. And she was running around worried. She could tell what was going on. And she said, oh, we got to have some Ativan. We got to have some morphine, because it's normally what you do when you're taking care of people at the end of life. You give them some medication to sort of let them relax and ease the transition. But with Bert, we didn't, we don't need any Ativan. We don't need any morphine. Bert is totally at peace. Bert has no regrets. There's nothing that he is left unfinished. Bert had a wonderful, full life and tremendous amount of love that he gave people and that people gave him. And that carried him through, I think, into that big open space wherever he was going, and reminded me so much of Thoreau. Supposedly when Thoreau was dying and they called a minister in, and the minister asked him if he had made peace with his maker, and Thoreau looked at him and said, I'm not sure that we ever quarreled. And that was exactly what Bert's passing reminded me of, and that's what I think was pretty emblematic of his whole life, the way he lived his life, the man who was in love with the world and the world was in love with him. Whatever transition he was going through, he was perfectly comfortable with it. I don't think there was any part of the universe that he was worried about where he wouldn't be at home, because Bert was always at home. That was the one thing that you could say about him.
I understand from Brandon that one of the things he asked when he woke up was, is this 2021? That getting through 2020 meant a lot to him.
Yes, he made it through 2020. This, of course, that last night we were over there was December 31st, and then New Year's Day, of course, he woke up and, yeah, am I still alive? This is 2021. He was pretty happy about that. That was, he made it to 2021, and pretty remarkable for pretty remarkable life. And he had seen a lot of things, but he was ready to go. It's time to go, and 2021 was here, so that was when he went. And he went talking about baby whales, which was great. Big interest of his, but of course everything was a big interest of his. Anything with natural history, he always wanted to hear about it. He always wanted to know about. If you brought up anything, he wanted to know about it, and wanted to hear what it was all about and how it fit into the world, and never ever lost that curiosity. Even got into his 90s. A lot of people lose that, but Bert never lost his curiosity about everything. I'd come over there. It was tough because I'd come over there and have dinner with him every week, and he'd want to know, well, tell me some things I don't know, and always wanting to hear new things.
Did you ever take him hunting?
No, I never did. I'm not sure whether Bert really ever went hunting or not. He talked about it. It's sort of like talking about fishing, but I don't, hunting is not really something that I can't really imagine. Bert was so much in love with every animal, the whole natural world. And hunting, I can't really imagine doing that. We went a lot of places and we did some pretty horrendous things, which are pretty scary. And looking back on running the lower Grovant at flood stage in my little raft, things like that. But
one quote that you're often quoted at is saying that as people get older, they have less and less friends, less and less people around them. But for Bert, it was very different.
Well, for Bert, it was very different. And, he went through a pretty tough spell there after Meg passed away. And he had a very hard time with that. He'd lost his best friend in the whole world and he couldn't really see any future. And so Bert went around talking about suicide to people. I'm getting all these calls from people in town who are so upset. They call me, Bert's talking about, committing suicide. And finally I told him, I said, Bert, what is this stuff? You got to stop doing this. You're bothering people. You're upsetting people. He thought about it. He said, you're right. And that just went away. He never even mentioned that again once he realized how that bothered other people. And not that I think he would have ever done that anyway, but that was just an expression of how bad he felt after Meg did pass away. But once he realized that how it was affecting other people, he shut up about that.
People have noted that when they're with Bert, all the attention is between them and Bert. That Bert doesn't bother talking about the person that came an hour ago or a day ago. It's all very focused and directed. In your experience, that's a pretty intense friendship with a lot of people.
It was an intense friendship with a lot of people, and it didn't matter who they were, what socioeconomic class, what their education level was. He was always appreciative and interested, and I don't think there was anybody he met that he couldn't get some interesting piece of information from, something he was interested in, and he was always interested in helping people. And you know, his parties were great. He would have those wonderful parties at Thanksgiving, Christmas, whenever, and just invite everybody. And he was always upset the next day because, well, there was so and so was there and I didn't get to talk to them. And talking to them really was something. It wasn't just exchanging anything about the weather. Bert always had something deeper than that with anybody he met. He had a deeper connection, and they went away feeling like this person really has a connection with me, just like he had a connection with the whole world, or the rest of the world. Pretty amazing. You don't meet people like that very often. He was totally open. There are no defenses there. Nothing he felt like he had to defend. It didn't even bother him when some of the people in town used to call him up late at night and harangue him, and damn bird lover, you know, and he would just laugh about it. I never saw him mad about that. Never saw him really mad about anything. He's always a true appreciation of the wonder of the world, and appreciation of the wonder of everybody. Even these people that called him up that ranted at him about the damn animal lover, he could get an appreciation and just see some humor in it, as opposed to the way a lot of people would react in that situation. The hazards of being too well educated.
Hey boy, a ferruginous hawk with poofus wrist patch and leg feathers, primary habitat prairies, brushy open country, and badlands, is about to shit on your, well, never mind.
Yeah.
Darn, I hate it when that happens. I mean, his humor was...
Oh, his humor, yeah, no, his sense of, goes along with his sense of appreciation of the world, and the fact that he could always see humor in everything. Even there at the end, when he woke up that morning and said, "Am I still alive?" He said that with a sense of humor. And there at the end, when Brenda and Sue were talking to him about the baby whale, reading this book, and he was laughing about that. I don't remember what. It didn't matter that he was passing away. It was all okay.
One of the things we've learned in research was that Bert was 5 years old when the stock market crashed in 29, and he lived just a mile from Wall Street. So he was right in the middle of it. And then he was 15 when the Depression ended. So he went through some really hard times in those early years, but he came out of that. He got himself, by joining ROTC, he was able to go to college and did really, really well in college. Did you ever talk with him about early years?
Oh, I asked him a lot about early years, but you know, he was a little bit reticent about those early years. They obviously were a little tough for him, and a lot of things that I don't think I know or knew, and some surprising things. You know, I got Bert's Bible, which was, you know, I looked in the front of it in the inscription there, and it said to Bert from his grandfather on the occasion of his bar mitzvah, which really surprised us all. He all through the years, he kept very quiet about the fact that he was Jewish. But, yeah, he had some reason to keep some of that quiet, but that's okay. That's perfectly fine. Whatever he developed, he just put that beside him and went on. And I think when he met Meg, that was a huge.
I mean, as you'll see on the slideshow that we put together, that was Meg. I mean, I've never seen a relationship that intense, and it started right away. I mean, he said she was really tall. I had to meet her, so I met her, and we didn't get along very well to begin with. But then we started to talk, and we never stopped talking.
Yeah,
and they seem to have just had an incredible close relationship.
Yeah, it was a pretty special relationship. It was pretty. It could be pretty intense too. Meg was somebody who didn't she definitely didn't let things slide. She definitely let you know what she was thinking, and she often had fairly strong opinions about things. And it didn't matter whether it was Bert or anybody else. If they had a different opinion, she didn't. She was going to have her own opinion. So she was definitely a good counterpart to Bert.
Well, Bert was very clear in his instructions that he gave me for what should happen after he lived. That we would get together at the museum and people would talk about the present and the future and the good, not the bad. And in many ways, that seems to say a lot about Bert. I mean, he didn't really like talking about history, whether it was his personal history or he was very much focused on how he could enjoy life now and how he could make life better in the future.
Yeah, well, and then how he could help other people, and what he could learn from other people, and that sense of curiosity and compassion that he had, and that's why everybody was always interested in helping him, because he just gave off that wonderful benevolence and compassion. And that's why we managed to keep him on home care at the hospital for how many years. I shouldn't even probably say this, but of course you're not supposed to do that. Somebody that you're taking care of with home health, once they get to a plateau, you're not, okay, that's it, you're out of there. Well, all the nurses and aides and so on at the hospital, they all wanted to keep going out there. They were willing to do it on their own time, even if just because they knew that he enjoyed it, and they so much enjoyed being around him, and it was not work for them. So we managed to have a really wonderful care team through the years.
Bert strongly preferred that he die at home, and it was the caregivers that made that possible.
It was the caregivers that made that possible, and I gave up arguing with him after through the years there. Bert, if you get really sick and you're really feeling really terrible, we should just, really should go down to the hospital. I'm not going to go to the hospital. And I learned after a while that was no, and there wasn't any getting around that. I'm at home, and I think, of course, in the end, that's the way he wanted to go. And I think he knew that was what he was capable. I was always very worried that when I get sick and it'd be miserable and terrible, hard to take care of him, but I should have known better. Bert was not gonna let that happen. And he was not going to go to the hospital. He already broke his hip once, and then he was the only guy I knew for many years that actually put that new hip in him. And then he working out his garage, he was a big guy, and he fell down on that cement floor and broke that hip prosthesis, which is almost impossible to do. Had to go back to the hospital and stay there quite a while, and so he had enough of hospitals.
Well, then there was the time that he stepped on the accelerator rather than the brake.
Well, there was that time, yes. And he sitting in front of the liquor store, and suddenly the liquor store had a vehicle in the store that they weren't planning on. When his foot slipped, that was kind of the end of when he did much driving. After that, that was a little bit of a hospital stay there. He always had a good humor about it, even though he didn't like being in the hospital. It didn't matter when he was in the hospital. Again, he was as good and kind to everybody, and everybody loved him at the hospital. Even though he did not want to be there, he wasn't going to make anybody else feel bad about him being there.
He loves to tell the story about how, with the nurse's help, when you were about to show up in the evening, you remember you came into the room and there were two nurses in bed with him.
Yeah, how he managed to do that, I don't know. That's a trick. I've never had anybody manage to quite do that.
Apparently they had it set up. So
they had it set up. Yes.
When they saw you coming, they by intercom, they said, okay, he's coming.
Yep.
Get ready.
I'm walking in the room. There's Bert with two nurses in bed with him. Well, that was pretty amazing. But only Bert could pull that off.
With a great smile.
Yeah.
A lot of people, when they get older, kind of get nastier in a way. And
They get more withdrawn, more self-centered, more, he was just the opposite, actually. He got less withdrawn, less self-centered, dissolved into the universe, in the big open universe. And then Bert he got bigger and bigger as he got older. His body got smaller and the rest of him just got bigger, bigger and warmer.
It was wonderful that he had his brain right up to the end, 100%.
Oh, that was truly amazing that his speech got more difficult. He couldn't talk as much, but boy, he sure wanted to be part of any conversation. He wanted to hear what was going on. Always had something to say about it, even if it took him a while there at the end to actually say something about it. He managed to say something.
I often gave him things to read on science that was related to what I was doing and to review. And they could be something short, they might be a little longer. Even when I was working on my book, I gave him parts. And what I discovered was, particularly if I read it to him and we're getting response back, there'd be a pause, and then he would say three things that were right on target, more on target than any of the scientists I've worked with. Right on target. And I learned very quickly that I could blow his comments away because they weren't presented the same way most people presented them, in an argumentative fashion, or they were stated subtly. But if I thought through every word, I learned a huge amount. I mean, he just was so perceptive, and he would get really into it.
Oh, he would, yeah. No, it was always amazing how you could be having a conversation with somebody else, a conversation about any kind of topic whatsoever, and you'd think Bert wasn't even paying attention, and after a while here'd come this comment, which would just be amazing in its perceptiveness and its intelligence. He never lost that, just took him a little longer and a little slower, but it was still all right there. Just had a little more trouble getting it out, but it was, I don't know how he did that. I'd like to know Bert's secret. I never did figure out Bert's secret. He must have had one somewhere, because that's pretty darn unusual to get into your 90s and people just aren't that way.
It was a wonderful tale came into the website today about someone who was at one of the birthday parties for the first time, didn't know much of anybody, talked a little bit, said goodbye to Bert, and Bert said, "Would you please come and visit?" And she thought, what? And so she came back and they became friends. And then she asked him, why on that night did you say, come visit me? And Bert said, well, I wanted to get to know you. I hadn't seen you before.
Yeah, no, he was always interested in his parties. If there's somebody there that he didn't know, okay, who's that person? I want to talk to him. I want to find out who they are, what they're about. Kind curiosity. Pretty impressive, yeah. A lot of people, would come to those parties. People really wanted to be around Bert. I remember Gator at one of Gator's parties, and Gator like, well, who are all these people? How come it's not just Bert's friends? I don't know, these are people that want to be around Bert. No, it's because he gives out all that free, if he didn't give out all that free food and liquor, those people wouldn't all show up. So no, Gator. Oh, yeah. But it was like Gator felt like he was Bert's special friend. Well, who were all these other people? Well, Gator was Bert's special friend, but so were all these other people.
That's really the amazing part, is that all of us feel that Bert was a special friend.
Well, they all do, yeah.
And that he was among the best friends we've ever had.
Oh, yeah.
And that was everybody. And we're talking, we started to put together a list to inform people about the get together, and we got over 300 very quickly. Yeah. And that's people who we knew considered themselves to be friends with Bert.
Oh, I know. And there were a lot of people that you didn't know. Run into these people and they hadn't heard anything about it and didn't know anything about it. Well, yeah, because they're not connected with you guys, but they knew Bert and you didn't know they knew Bert. And yet they felt like they were a special friend of Bert's.
Bert was amazing in inspiring people to do things. And especially, Bird Club related or anything in life for that matter. He somehow inspired you to try harder. It was impressive because he could often get what he thought was the right thing to do, but he didn't have to order you. He didn't tell you. He wasn't direct. Or if he disagreed with you, he didn't come back at you strongly, but he'd come back subtly on the side And if you were listening and willing to discuss, he was there for you.
With the immense respect that he had in his later years in his community, he could have been very authoritarian, very dogmatic. He was never that way at all. He was always, like you say, he always inspired people. He always encouraged people to do good things, and it was very important to him that he did that. I think that was starting the wildlife fund that he did meant really a lot to him. He was really something that he could really feel good about, and it didn't matter that whether his name was attached to it or not. He did not have any sense of, okay, I'm doing this because this is some monument to Bert Raynes. No, this was something that was being done for the world, and that really made him feel good, really meant a lot to him, and there's no ego involved with that at all. A lot like Marty Murray, and of course he was a good friend of Marty Murray's, and they were very similar in that regard, that they really could encourage people to do good things. They could cause a lot of positive actions to occur, yet it was never centered around them. It didn't have to be about them at all.
In the mid-90s, Bird Group and others raised money and built Bert's Walk and the Make Stand out in the elk refuge. Do you remember much about the 90s? And it's interesting that a whole lot of people came together. There was a big dinner, which Jan played a major role in organizing for the donors. And it was a pretty impressive thing to grow out of the community. Yeah. And one wonders how that happened.
Yeah, I don't know. I can't remember the details of how that happened. There was so much of that stuff in those early years, and so much of the bird club stuff, and really do something when he got dissatisfied with groups, like starting an Audubon chapter, things like that. Well, he didn't want to do that. He wanted a local chapter that really was something that local people were really doing, and that was some real constructive action being taken by local people, which is why, okay, we're going to do the bird club here. It's not going to be an Audubon chapter. It's not going to be any kind of chapter of anything. It's going to be the Jack's whole bird club, and the type of guy he was. This came from local individuals, and you could get people to get involved with things like that.
He felt that the Audubon membership was too expensive for people in Jackson and the kind of people he wanted to attract. And of course, in birding, there's this issue between the snobs that know all the details and compete with each other, and the more people like Bert that just want to enjoy the birds and try to learn together.
Yeah.
And so apparently he made it very clear to see. I mean, he'd been head of Audubon in Cleveland. Yeah. And it has some difficult experiences. And he really wanted the bird club here to be of the people, for the people, by the people.
Yeah. Oh yeah. He wanted it to be a local agenda and not an agenda that was imposed by anybody else. And again, it wasn't him. It wasn't something about him. He didn't have any particular dogma that he was trying to teach or insist on any kind of particular way of thinking, but it was just, okay, this is our own group, and this is something we are going to do for ourselves. And it's so much more meaningful when you have something like that is a real self-grown type of community, which it was. And Bert was really responsible for developing a lot of the wildlife community here. It's been fairly disparate through the years, where lots of different organizations and people have gone their different ways, but the one thing that did tend to kind of unite them was Bert Raynes. There wasn't anybody that didn't know Bert Raynes, and anybody that didn't have an immense respect for him and consider him as somebody to listen to when it came to any of these issues. Organizations here and people that have come and gone, but the one common thread that runs through it all, maybe was kind of the background inspiration for so much of it was Bert Raynes. Certainly was in my case. Certainly in Marty Murray initially. Marty was just a phenomenal person as well, but as she got older and when she passed away, and Bert sort of took up those reins.
Well, it's interesting that he says that as an adolescent and a teenager, he read widely about the West and particularly about the Muries and the Craigheads and Jackson Hole. So the first chance they got to take a vacation, they came out to Jackson, and it was in June. And he says it was the wrong month. We didn't see much of the mountains. It was raining all the time. The mosquitoes
I
were,
remember talking about the mosquito.
mosquitoes were
days, yeah.
interesting.
Yes.
And he says, but the people, we really liked the people.
They did, yeah.
So here's this naturalist settling
Yeah.
down in Jackson, not to be a naturalist so much, or at least one of the real benefits of Jackson was the people were kind of can-do people that
Yeah,
he related to.
he really did appreciate the people. He never lived anywhere like Jackson Hole, so that was definitely very different for him. But he really settled in, and he really gained the respect of all kinds of people, not just people that, not just wildlife people and nature people, but all kinds of different people, except for those few people that read his columns and called him up late at night and ranted at him. But there were very few of those. I think there were only about 2, but but everybody else, yeah, they really had a great liking, respect for Bert. And I never actually met anyone that ever had a bad word to say about Bert. That's pretty amazing, pretty remarkable.
He was very successful in chemical engineering, and for 25 years or whatever, did some amazing things, and was in an interesting group. And I've talked to his assistant during part of that time, and he rambles on. I mean, this is someone he worked with him, shared the office with him in the 60s, rambles on about Bert, raves on just the way all the rest of us do.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been Bert.
Yeah.
all the way there.
Yeah.
Did you know that he sang barbershop quartet?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Did he ever talk about that?
Oh, yeah, sure. No, he loved talking about that. I've never heard him sing, but that was before my time. I would love to heard him sing, but no, he really very much enjoyed that.
There are some good pictures of, apparently it's why he was working with GE, got in with a different crowd there. And
Yeah.
Anyway, I'd never been aware of that.
Yeah.
Do you remember times around the campfire or just laid back talking? Were there any interesting things that came up with Bert?
Well, it's yeah, there certainly were, there were a lot of things that could interest Bert. He had an interest in just about everything, and he would explore just about everything. You could talk about anything, even though towards the end of his life, maybe he liked talking about Stormy Daniels and hoping that she was going to show up to his party. We were going to try to actually get her to come to his Thanksgiving or Christmas party or something like that. Didn't quite make that. Too bad. But he would have appreciated it.
Well, I know Jan invited Vice President Gore to come to the party for the refuge.
Yeah.
Got a very polite letter back saying, I'm sorry, but in the last decade especially, we've gotten so much more polarized nationally. And that seemed to upset Bert a lot, that he was much more about bringing people together than.
He was upset about it, but of course he was also very interested in it, and he followed all of that type of controversy very closely. He would watch that, and he would think about it, and he would comment on it. Definitely had feelings about it, and definitely was distressing to him, but at the same time it was also very interesting to him. So his sense of his intellectual curiosity and his interest in how people behaved was such that it was okay. He could still be interested in.
I think it's a great story how when the women started talking about going out to lunch on Wednesdays, Bert and Gus Schwartz and Frank Craighead decided, well, if the women can do it, we can do it. And that led to the Deaf as a Post lunch bunch, which has been going strong for, I mean, that was mid-70s, I believe.
That was mid-70s. Yeah.
And you've been in and out of that group. I mean,
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that was Bert. Bert was responsible for that.
And for a long time, he was the one that invited people to join.
Yeah. One that decided on people joining. Yeah.
And he attended every week as long as he could.
Yeah. One thing he didn't like formal organizations. See, that was not his style, but the Deaf as a Post Club, something like that was perfect. He didn't like organizations where you were on the board, things like that. He tried that a little bit, but that was not to his liking. He didn't like the rules, the regulations, the bureaucratic formalities of any of that. So So yeah, I think that was partly in reaction to that, because he was on some various boards at one time, did not like the politics of it, didn't like the bureaucracy of it. So, okay, we're going to start the Deficit Post Club instead, which is kind of the antithesis of that type of body.
He's quoted as saying, I don't do well on boards because I tend to want to go back and read the bylaws. And people don't like that. He says, I'm much happier if I just get a chore and go do it.
Yeah, yeah. No, I tried to get him on various boards. I thought, oh, it'd be great to have him on these. No, that wasn't what he was going to do. He was a one-on-one person. He was not an organization type of guy. That was like the Bird Club. It's very loose and very individual